How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so I think one of the most fundamental truths about human life is this. It's that there is no future without a past. Our own history, where we come from, the traditions we've inherited, and the choices we've made, all of these influence our future. They all shape the potential and the scope of who we can become. Our future is the carrying forward of our past. And I don't mean this deterministically or passively. I mean that it's through revisiting and reflecting on and interpreting our past that our future opens up to us. So in a way, we could say that we don't really move forward until we first come to terms with what has been. Now, the ancient Greeks certainly understood this. I mean, in Greek tragedy and in Greek mythology, the weight of the past is pretty much inescapable. And in fact, the past for them is often linked to destiny. For example, think about the story of Oedipus, where Oedipus can't escape the prophecy that he'll marry his mother and kill his father. Or how about the story of Agamemnon, whose murder of his own daughter brings vengeance down on his household? Yet at the same time, these Greek tragedies show us more than just this. They also show us that to confront one's destiny brings real meaning. In other words, for them, confrontation with one's past usually ends up with a significant personal transformation. For these Greek heroes, there is no such thing as redemption without remembering. They need to suffer their personal history if they want reconciliation or moral awakening. They can't begin their future until they've faced and integrated their past. Actually, now that I think about it, we see a very sort of similar view in the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky over 2,000 years later. I mean, his stories are populated with characters who are haunted by their pasts, and many of them discover that the path to moving forward in life lies in remembering. And in particular, for the religious Dostoevsky, it lies in confessing. Take, for example, the seminal novel Crime and Punishment. There, the main character, Raskolnikov, intentionally commits murder, and he thinks he's justified in doing so. But what he soon discovers, against his own cold reasoning, is that he just can't move forward in life. He eventually realizes that he needs to look back and confront his guilt, because it's only through repentance and redemption that a future for him is possible. According to Dostoevsky, a future that's severed from the past is definitely no freedom. For him, we need continuity. We need to reconcile who we were with who we hope to be if we want to move forward. Actually, speaking of continuity, this reminds me of the 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, because he said something sort of similar. So he has this great quote, and it goes like this: "Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward." Now, I think what he partly means by this is that even though life for him is definitely a forward-moving affair, it can only be lit up and understood and renewed by looking back to one's past. In other words, if we want to move forward with any kind of authenticity, if we want to really live, according to Kierkegaard, we have to face our history honestly and come to terms with and take responsibility for our past choices. If we don't do this, if we live solely in the present, then really we live a life with no depth and no sustained sense of self. It's only by binding together one's past and one's future into some coherent or unified whole that we form what he considers to be a moral self. And by moral self, he means somebody who's moved beyond mere immediacy, someone whose identity is grounded in chosen commitments and not in untethered present moment desires. Okay, well, you know what? There's another very important thinker that comes to my mind here, and that is, of course, Sigmund Freud. Not in the moral or religious sense, but in the psychological sense. So, as most of us know, for Freud, the past is never really something that's gone. No, it remains buried deep within us, buried in what he calls the unconscious. And what's often buried there are early childhood experiences that continue to influence us far after we've forgotten their origins. Now, Freud believed that if we don't acknowledge and address this forgotten past of ours, then that past becomes a script for our future behavior. As Freud would say, we repeat rather than remember. So the goal for him, for the project of psychoanalysis as a whole, is to try to consciously face and understand our past so that we can face our future in a healthier way, so that the unprocessed past doesn't keep returning and determining our lives. Okay, so the last thinker I want to briefly say something about is the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, because he also emphasizes the importance of the past in creating a meaningful future. But Ricoeur's angle is slightly different. What he stresses is interpretation and narrative. So for him, memory isn't something passive. What I mean is that it doesn't involve just recalling some kind of frozen record of the past or some fixed archive of facts. No, memory is a continuous act of interpretation. In other words, to remember is to tell a story. And it's through that story that we slowly give shape to who it is we are and who we want to be. Re-narrating our past can be a powerful tool because by telling a story about what has been, we can turn a kind of disparate chaos into something coherent, and we can turn suffering into meaning. In other words, it's through this reinterpretation of the past that we can shape what kind of future becomes possible for us. Now, having said all of this, we should keep in mind that not all forgetting of the past is harmful or unhealthy. Sometimes forgetting makes renewal possible. And actually, Ricoeur also believed this. Alongside his emphasis on reinterpreting the past, he also talked about something he called forgetting as healing. And by that, he meant that sometimes forgetting was necessary because it allowed for forgiveness to take place. And actually, now that I think about it, the German philosopher Nietzsche also warned that an excessive looking back to the past is not always a good thing either. But his reason was different from Ricoeur's. His reason was that too much reverence for the past can stultify or paralyze action. Sometimes we have to let go of what is old to be able to actually take action and to make the new possible again. Anyway, to get back to the main point about all of this, what all of these thinkers and philosophers that I've mentioned believe is that ultimately there is no future without a past. And so they all encourage us not to escape the past, but in one way or another to accept and to redeem it. They want us to recognize that our past isn't an obstacle to be overcome, but it's the very ground of personal transformation. It's through facing our past honestly and with some imagination that we transform memory into freedom, into a future that is truly our own. Bye for now.